Now that I've completely covered Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil series, I felt it appropriate to make a whole video out of my real problem with his movies. For the record, I don't hate the first 5 of Anderson's series as much as I let on. Despite my rigid tone, the first 5 movies do have their entertaining moments, exceptionally rare as they may be, and I do enjoy dissecting the series, and as an aspiring writer myself, seeing what works and what doesn't work in their narrative favor. Believe it or not, these movies do have a chorus of defenders, one of the most vocal being a man I personally have a great deal of respect for, a considerably bigger YouTuber than myself, who goes by the name of Good Bad Flicks. There are movies I would have never heard of or even given a second glance at if not for his video. So understand that just by dropping his name in this video, this is not some thinly veiled attempt on myself to clout chase. Now, many defenders of the Resident Evil movies, Good Bad Flicks very much included, often cite the reason most people don't like the series in question is out of fanboy purism, and in all truth, they're kind of right. Look, I'm not one of them, but I happen to be a movie guy on top of being a gamer. Quite a few gamers are not totally hip to the perils of adapting something from one medium to another, from books to comics to anime to popular television shows to, of course, video games. Changes will have to be made to make the material objectively work in its transition from one medium to the other. So an exact one-to-one adaptation of your favorite video games is an impossibility, and I say this as someone who is fully aware of and even a fan of S.D. Perry's novelization of the original Resident Evil game. Hell, my favorite movie of all time is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, a film that deviates quite a bit from the Michael Crichton novel it's allegedly adapting. Really, my issue isn't that these movies are such a departure from the games, but rather how they are such a departure from the games. Look, Anderson initially had the right idea of borrowing elements from the games and utilizing those to craft his own original story set in the Resident Evil universe, an approach that Johannes Roberts seems to be taking in helming his own upcoming reboot. And this approach has worked in favor of certain video game-based movies. Silent Hill, Prince of Persia, Need for Speed, Hitman, the good one from 2007, mind you, not that 2015 deboot Hitman Agent We're Terribly Sorry We Couldn't Afford Jason Statham, all borrowed elements from their respective franchises and meshed them together. Sometimes this generated some flawed but admittedly entertaining cinema, and sometimes you got Silent Hill Revelation. Fuck that noise. Look, I've gone through this series multiple times on my own time, and while I do believe he started out from a place of earnestness, genuinely wanting to bring the magic of Resident Evil to the big screen, the more I watch these movies, the more convinced I become that Anderson got so high on his own ideas that he completely lost sight of what attracted people to the Resident Evil games to begin with. Resident Evil was never about heavy metal music, bullet time, Matrix cinematography, and an actual Mary Sue. It was about fighting off that impending dread you feel every time you enter a new room or hallway, just knowing there might be something lurking in the shadows ready to munch on your carotid, praying you'll have enough rounds in your Beretta to take down the threat. The first 3 movies do have a clear sense of focus from a narrative standpoint. You do feel like they're building towards something. And then Afterlife happens, and from there the movies feel like Anderson is just throwing random shit at the wall to see what sticks. Well, let's throw in Chris Redfield, and we'll have this African executioner in LA for no discernible reason, and we'll recreate this little hand-to-hand exchange between Chris and Wesker, and it'll be in 3D, and shit'll just be cool, yo. For a director, Anderson wasn't showing a real sense of direction. And before you hit me with the, but Chris, he didn't even direct all 6 movies. True, he directed the first movie and the latter half of the franchise, with a first-time main unit director helming the second movie and a veteran director helming the third. But he wrote and produced all 6 movies. His name is all over this franchise. Once he came back to direct the last 3 movies, with 3 consecutive successes already a part of the series, Sony pretty much just let him do whatever he wanted, and this is where the overlaying issue with the movies began for me. With him writing, producing, and directing, he pretty much had carte blanche with no adults from the studio to tell him no. Well, I'd love to live in a land of milk and honey where every director, when the gloves are taken off and they're given free rein to tell their story the way they want to tell it, generates full on gems like Reservoir Dogs and Brawl and Cell Block 99. Not nearly every single director is Quentin Tarantino or S. Craig Zahler. More often than not, creative people do need somebody to reel them in. And I'm not talking about some Harvey Weinstein type cum rag who comes in at the 11th hour, kicks you out of the editing room, and butchers your movie into a shadow of what you had initially intended it to be. No, I mean somebody who can objectively reel you in, ground you in reality, and say, this sucks. You've got a lot of really interesting ideas here, but they've got to mesh together properly. You're completely forgetting entire plot points from previous movies and throwing in a bunch of characters with real potential, but they're just treated like window dressing. And let's just come right out with it. For a series that ran for 14 years, these movies are so firmly wedged in the year 2002 they should come equipped with frosted tipped hair, a Nickelback t-shirt, and a pair of Jinkos. From the intensity of events being artificially sped up by fast, almost music video level editing, to the extremely out of place heavy metal soundtrack of the first movie, which I maintain is extremely distracting and outright undercuts any attempts you make at building anything resembling atmospheric tension, regardless of how genuine that may be. And that carries over the first couple of sequels with their 24 humping electronic action movie scores, and the latter three movies with their wubstep. Because when I think fear, I think wub 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 wub. The only terror present is the fact that wubstep reflexively conjures up a mental image of Chris Pontius and a silver G-string for me. And then there's what passes for a protagonist. Look, Anderson creating his own protagonist so he wouldn't be bound by the constraints of being forced to adapt fan favorites is almost a passable enough excuse for me. Fucking almost. Had he not attempted to incorporate fan favorite characters into his own movies, albeit ones that for the most part amount to porn quality casting and Party City quality costume design, people who say that Anderson only cast Milla Jovovich in the lead role so he could give his wife work do so completely ignorant of the fact that Anderson and Milla didn't meet one another until pre-production on the first movie had already began, and didn't marry until more than a month prior to the filming of Afterlife. I do, however, find it more than a little suspect that as soon as Anderson took directorial reins back for Afterlife and Beyond, suddenly the movies went from genuine attempts at providing a balanced ensemble of capable survivors to Alice's Supergirl and everyone else's Gomer Pyle in terms of combat competence. I think I lost any sense of respect for Alice I may have had as a character around the end of Extinction and the beginning of Afterlife. At the end of Extinction, she learns that she has all the equipment to synthesize an antivirus derived from her blood that can stop the entire apocalypse. But does she do this? Nope. She chooses to pursue personal vengeance against Umbrella, which ends up dragging the movies out for 3 movies longer than necessary, pushing humanity to the brink of annihilation, and culminating in a plot twist in the final chapter that hits with all the raw power of an ICU crack baby, even if you had to make a 4th movie. That could have been about Alice heading up to Alaska, hooking up with Claire Redfield, possibly meeting Chris Redfield, Leon Kennedy, and Barry Burton, and finding a suitable spot to release the antivirus, only to then go Super Saiyan and sure you can punch the fuck out of Umbrella. It would have spared us, at a minimum, 2 unnecessary sequels, and unlike the latter half of the series, which felt like Anderson was just making shit up as he went along, it might have made something resembling actual sense. And let's stop kidding ourselves. Anderson and Milla can talk our ears off all they want about what an exceptional heroine Alice is, but that doesn't alter the fact that she's a mind-bendingly uninteresting protagonist. She's a blank slate from the beginning of this series, and while she does some really badass things in the movies, that doesn't save her from having a personality with the depth of a shot glass all the way through to the end. Take a lesson from every Final Fantasy game since the original FF7. If your protagonist has more belt buckles and zippers than personality traits, you should head back to the drawing board. Your protagonist doesn't need to have ocean depth to be compelling, but just doing awesome shit does not a character make. And maybe stop finding every conceivable excuse you can think to awkwardly shoehorn your heroine into bondage gimp attire. I'm not saying that skin suit she was rocking in Retribution was too tight, but I'm pretty sure her cunt doubled as a sundial. But this is all in the past. The series is moving forward in a new direction with a new movie coming to theaters with a projected late 2021 release date, and I wait with bated breath to see what Johannes Roberts does with it. Maybe, possibly, it will spawn a successful run of sequels that actually forms a coherent narrative without forgetting what makes Resident Evil Resident Evil.